Hello, this is Haider Ali, and we're looking at Chapter 10 of Principles of Marketing. This question asks, explain why the introduction phase of the product lifecycle can be such a difficult one for new products. Explain what is meant by the following terms: information cascades, positive network externality, bandwagon effect. And finally, for a new product of your choice, explain how an understanding of the above concepts will help you use the elements of the marketing mix, product, place, price, promotion to market the product. As you'll see, this question covers a range of different issues, and again, it pays to read the entire question before you attempt an answer, because if there are concepts mentioned here which you are not familiar with, then you will not gain any marks for not being able to answer about those particular concepts. So, looking at this question, the first part, the introduction stage of the product life cycle, it's challenging because technology can be new and uncertain. Buyers are unaware of the product and its benefits. There are higher levels of perceived risk at the introduction stage. And although there may be less competition from products that meet the same wants, there may be competition from products that meet the overall need. Let's look at this last point in a bit more detail. What we're talking about here is that at the introduction stage, although one may not have competition from companies who are selling exactly the same product as we are, nevertheless, there may be companies who sell products that fulfill a similar need. To take a concrete example, when MP3 players first came onto the market, the manufacturers who made those products may not have had much in the way of competition from other MP3 player manufacturers, but they did face competition from companies that were making, for example, portable CD players, which, although they wouldn't fulfill the same want, did fulfill the same overall need. And those CD players, although they may have been larger, they may have been bulkier, may well have been a great deal cheaper than the MP3 players when they first came onto the market. And as a result, they would have offered a competition to those new MP3 players. So what this part of the answer is driving at is that for the company introducing products at the introduction stage of the product life cycle, there can be significant risks because what they're making may have significant risks attached because the technology is new and uncertain. The company may not recognize how that technology could fail, and we've all come across new products which have come onto the market, and a few months later there have had to be product recalls because the new product has failed in some way. For example, there have been cases of certain types of cell phones or mobile telephones which have used new technology and which have failed and exploded and so on. The second point regarding distributors having contracts with others means that it may be difficult for a firm to launch a new product into the marketplace because the distributors of products have contracts with firms, already have those contracts, and it's difficult to break into those particular markets. Also, raising awareness of the existence of a new product is extremely difficult to do, and convincing customers that a new offering is drastically better than what they're already familiar with is something which can be very expensive and difficult to do. This is one of the reasons why, for example, Apple is considered to be so successful, because the company is able to introduce new technologies, introduce new products, and create such a hype that people become very quickly aware of what the company has to offer and is able to address this particular problem. Also, where customers are buying products at the early stages of the product life cycle, because those customers are unfamiliar with the product and what it can do, those customers may perceive greater levels of risk. The second part of the question asked what is meant by the terms information cascades, positive network externalities, and bandwagon effects. And this slide covers the basic explanations of these terms. As we've seen in other chapters, when you're asked for definitions of course concepts, you do not have to give a word-perfect answer drawn from the textbook or the study guide. You can use your own words as long as you describe the gist of the concept, the key essence of the concept. So as far as information cascades are concerned, what happens here is that instead of a costly process of information searching to determine product quality, people, consumers, buyers observe what others do in the marketplace. As far as positive network externalities are concerned, these are the benefits that accrue to a customer from being part of a network of users who consume the same good or service. So here what we're talking about are, for example, things such as being part of, say, a social network, say Facebook or Bebo or MySpace, where the benefits to a consumer accrue from having lots of friends and associates who are part of the same network. If you're the only person who is on Facebook, then clearly Facebook is not particularly valuable to you as a service. Bandwagon effects refer to positive network externalities in which someone demands a good in part because many other people have the good as well. So in these situations, what happens is that the reason why somebody buys something is because there are lots of others who already have that product or service. Now, the last part of the question asked for a new product of your choice. Explain how an understanding of these above concepts will help you use the elements of the marketing mix to market the product. So, how will the knowledge of network externalities and bandwagon effects help the marketeer of a new product? Possible examples, possible answers could include references to these points. That given the social need to be in style, which is associated with fads and fashions, and the usefulness to marketing communications, is that, for example, where firms sell new games consoles at low prices, this is to establish a large user base and thereby create positive network externalities. That we can understand the pricing strategies used by firms selling games consoles because they recognize the massive network externalities that are at play when people buy computer games. They want to be in a position where they can swap games with their friends, play the same games online, and for this reason Sony and Microsoft, for example, want as many people as possible to adopt their products as soon as they come onto the marketplace, and that is the reason why games consoles are sold at a relatively cheap price. It's relatively cheap compared to the actual manufacturing cost. On this slide, we explain some of the benefits of having that type of pricing strategy. That the large user base would also encourage sales of associated games, and large sales of these would mean that more firms would write games for the console. So you actually have a virtuous cycle of events happening, that a low price means that lots of consumers buy the game's console. If lots of consumers buy the game's console, then people who write games, independent companies who write games for those consoles, will be encouraged to write even greater numbers of games for the console. The larger the quantity of games available for a console, the more future generations of buyers will be encouraged to adopt that console as well. The usefulness of the information cascade concept in this instance, for games consoles, for example, people may be willing to take the signal from others. This is because games consoles have various relevant features. They're experience goods, but they're not really credence goods. What we mean by this is that if I have friends who have a particular games console, and because this is an experience good, then I may be more willing to buy it, having seen what the product is like and its benefits from the experience of other consumers. Also, what happens in this sort of instance is that where we see famous people adopting the product early, this may become a signal for us to adopt it as well. Also, because consoles are released so infrequently, and because there are significant changes from one generation of console to the next, customers are less likely to rely on their own sampling history. It's less likely to exist. And this again explains the reason why the information cascade may be used for this particular type of product. On this slide, we explain how informational cascades work. And the idea being presented here is that on the right, we see different consumers, and what is happening in this instance is that at the beginning, a consumer may rely on their own experience, on their own information search, and also on the cascade information provided by Aaron. But what happens as we go further down from Aaron to Barbara to Clarence and Donna, as we go further down, the quantity of information being given by these people is becoming much greater than what somebody could gather by themselves. So by the time, for example, we get to Donna, there are so many people there with information about how good that product is that regardless of whatever information we may have gathered for ourselves, we're likely to believe what it is that these people are actually saying. So the notion of the cascade is that the more people we know who have a particular opinion about a product or service, the less likely we are to actually rely on our own private information search before we make a purchase. This slide highlights the notion of the positive network externality. And what it is showing us is that the increase in the size of the network increases the number of others one can communicate with, which is a direct positive network externality. And increasing the size of the network increases the range of complementary products, which is the indirect network, positive network externality. And this slide gives a brief definition of some of the concepts I referred to earlier when we talked about experience goods, for example, those where quality is hard to judge. So with consoles, for example, I explained that those were experience goods because for that type of product, simply looking at it, it's difficult to judge whether or not it's any good. If, on the other hand, you have people or you know people who already have that product and you can see how it's used in their homes, then the quality becomes much easier to judge. So it's an experience good. You can only find out how good or bad it is by seeing how well it operates in real life. So this is another reason why people like Microsoft and Apple, or sorry, not Apple, like Microsoft and Sony price their products relatively cheaply, is so that as many people as possible will buy them. They'll show them to their friends, to their relatives, who will then be able to see how good the product is, and then will be buying them as a result. And this slide just explains the notion of positive network externalities in a little bit more detail. But we don't really need to go through this for the purposes of this answer. We've covered